Okay, so let's start. Welcome everyone to today's webinar. We're going to focus on effectively introducing and rolling out new technologies across a whole company. My name is Tamás Borodi. I'm the head of the OpenSpace team in the UK and Northern Europe, and I'm very excited to be the host of this discussion today. This session is a little bit different than our usual webinar, so you're not going to hear too much about OpenSpace itself or our use cases, our benefits. But what we will do rather is focus on a big challenge what many customers face, which is how to start using new technology, encourage widespread use, and steer transformation on a scale. And the reason we're doing that over the last 4 years, we worked and supported hundreds of companies in rolling out and scaling reality capture with OpenSpace. And what became really, really clear and evident that launching a new technology, driving adoption, managing change within the organization are some of the biggest challenges our customers face. And we thought it would be worthwhile to host a discussion. And the idea is to explore the key consideration, discuss best practices, bring in some real-life examples from experts, people, and organizations who've gone through these challenges. And hence, I'm very happy to join by two fantastic and experienced guests on the panel, James from McLaren and Angelos from SEKTOR. The guys bringing a wealth of knowledge and experience, and I'm really excited to hear your insights. So a warm welcome to you both. And guys, if you wouldn't mind, just do a bit of intro and tell a little bit about background of yourself. That would be great. So James, if you want to start, please.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So I'm James Eaton. I'm head of digital delivery here at McLaren. So my background's just I was a QS by background, so no booing on that one, and drifted into the world of 15 years ago of the sort of digital world and digital technologies in large scale tier one. So I've been with the likes of Langer Rourke, Sir Robert McAlpine, set up my own digital consulting business, and now back at McLaren to help digitally transform a business that's really in the last 5 years gone from, I would say, a 400 million to over £1 billion business. So a lot gone on here, and hopefully I'll be able to draw, like Tamás said, on a couple of sort of examples of what we faced as we've gone through that journey, particularly in the last 2 years as we talk through the next 30 minutes or so.
Yeah, thank you. Amazing. Angelos.
Thanks, Tamás. Thank you for inviting us. It's great to be here. Thanks for everyone who's joining us. A quick intro to SEKTOR. For those of you who don't know us, we've been working with OpenSpace for quite a few years now. Lots of successful adoption implementations across the EMEA region. What SEKTOR does is we make sure that companies don't waste billions on technologies that they never adopt. And right now, there's a massive race to adopt AI. So this is as important as it ever was. We automate the critical processes that drive adoption so that every technology you buy delivers profit. And that's the most important thing that could make it competitive today. And we find that companies too often gamble with their tech investments, and we just want to make sure that that never, ever happens. My background's in civil engineering, construction management, project management. I worked in the field before we started SEKTOR, when we realized that companies were buying technologies. The purchases were there, the use was not there. Adoption was the biggest problem, and we built a platform to resolve that.
Thank you, guys. You're bringing a lot of relevant experience, and you touched on a few points, Angelos, which we will cover in the next few minutes. Before we start, I just want to say a quick housekeeping note for the audience. So this is a live session. It's really nice to have a lot of participants on the call. If you have any questions, then please put that into the chat box on the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. You can see those boxes. I'm going to monitor these questions during the session. We might address that during the discussion, but we will have a Q&A session at the end. So we will try to address all those questions. And the webinar is being recorded as we speak, so you will get a copy of the whole session, at some point in the future. So that's just the housekeeping. And to explain the structure at the beginning, what we want to do is explore and discuss the decision-making process, how you decide about rolling out or scaling technology, and then we will move into the implementation, best practices, strategies, etc. So I would say let's start with the beginning. And James, the first question will be for you, or is for you. How actually you decide if the technology is ready for a company-wide use, and what are the key considerations in this decision?
Yeah, so interesting. Angelo sort of touched on it a little bit in his opening statement. So I don't think it's a question about whether that it's less to do with the technology, and I always look at the process. So the underlying process is the most important thing any business needs to look at, which is going to digitize or bring technology in to improve faster, whatever, and gain the benefits. So the first thing I always question is, do we have a defined process for whatever we're about to embark on to bring something in? What is that? Bring the key stakeholders in who own that process in the business, so it feels it's not being done to them. And it's that sort of willingness and the eagerness of the stakeholders to both define the as-is process and the future improved process, which is what I focus on. So really good case study, and I'll keep trying to bring case studies in, is a recent one we've got in this organization is around sort of subcontract execution, production of information, tendering. I would say that's probably the best example I've had in my career of a definition of the stakeholder requirements. So in this organization, they brought together some really the best commercial people in the organization, and those requirements have been written down, defined, the process being mapped out, every data point's been mapped out, every part of that process has been defined before we've even embarked on engaging in any technology discussion. So I'd say that would be the front and center of where I would start any consideration, really.
Okay, very interesting. Angelos, I'm sure you have some experience here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking on the behalf of many of our clients, when is the technology ready to be rolled out across the enterprise? We very often find that companies buy technologies because it's the trend, but they don't really think about what is the job that I'm hiring this product, this platform to do for me. What is the job that I want this technology to do for me? And once that is defined, once they know the job that they want the technology to do for them, let's say they purchase a project management solution. I'm not giving the example of OpenSpace here because I think when you're rolling out OpenSpace, it's very clear what you're rolling out, right? It's a 360 reality capture solution. It's very clear what you're hiring OpenSpace to do for you. When you're rolling out a project management solution, for instance, there's many jobs that platform can do for you. It can help you with your financial management. It can help you roll out standardized quality control processes. It can help you, with the wealth of things. You're ready to roll it out across the enterprise when you clearly know the one job that you wanted to do for you originally, when that original rollout happens. And only then do we go and say, all right, you're ready for an enterprise rollout right now of this technology.
Okay. Yeah, so you talked about a specific job. I always talk about pain, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that very much leads actually to the next point, is that how you can ensure that this adoption or driving this technology supports your overall business strategy or objective. What's your experience there, Angelo?
I think we've learned.
James. Yeah.
We've learned a lot in the last. I would say the last 3 years has just been so much change in terms of how we set that up. We've created a minimum requirements from IT when we engage any technology, so we know it's going to fit into that overall tech stack, and the bit Angelos made. There's so many providers now. I think OpenSpace is pretty unique in it. Well, it is growing in its other applications, but there's lots of providers out there trying to grow what they're trying to sell, and often you can get lost in that sort of enterprise deal, and you suddenly go off and you're down a rabbit warren. So I always think you should be buying best in breed for what you're trying to solve, and then make sure that you get the integration right with your other tech stack. And we've here got a very clear requirements hurdle that any vendor that we bring in has to clear, so that then when we need to then get involved in the sort of integration and the points that you invariably get into as you start to deploy, and the interrelationships between all the various technologies, we know it can work, or we'll make it work. Whereas I would go back even 4 years ago, I don't think we were very clear around what our expectations were when we were engaging that provider. So it's all a little bit loose, and there was promises maybe both sides of what was going to happen. We've tightened that up immensely now. So if you were onboarded as a new enterprise partner, and Tamas will will know this because he's a recent one, there'll be hurdles to make sure that you'll become completely, or you will become integrated into that overall tech stack. So that's what I think we've learned a lot in the last 3 to 4 years. That's completely changed for me. Yeah, that's how that's a big thing to look at.
I can definitely.
And to build on James's point, when you go past your requirements, I think integrations are a big one. Defining the job to be done is a big one. Defining the pain point is a big one. Your security compliance, these are all very, very important that have to be taken into account, both from the vendors, from the products, because you'd be surprised how frequently they're not taken account from the products themselves, but also from the companies. But if I were to simplify the purchase of a technology, for us is when you purchase a technology, it should always equal profit, one way or another, and that could mean that you're increasing your revenues, or it could mean that you're becoming more efficient as a company, and therefore your profitability is increasing, right? So if I were to simplify, what your target should be when purchasing a technology, always look, for to increase your productivity. And the data is out there, right? Technology can help us increase our productivity, our output by 25 to 30%. If you're purchasing a technology and you're not increasing your output by 25 to 30%, you need to go back and look at that. Is there a different technology that I could buy that would help me achieve that? Or am I doing something wrong with the adoption of this technology? Am I adopting it too late? Am I adopting it for the wrong things, to the wrong teams? And therefore, I am not achieving this increase in productivity that I'm looking for.
And I would say, building on that, I would say that it's a low margin, tier one contracting, which is mainly where I am, is a low margin. It's a low margin game. A £1 billion business might return 3%. One good year might return 4%, and there's many bad years. Or you've only got to look at the consolidation of the tier one market in the last couple of years. And so, it is really a game of mitigating risk. So when you bring in technology, it's productivity. It's also about managing risk. It's, are you bringing in something that's going to manage that risk, that's protecting those margins? And I'll use other examples, Tamas, as we go through this, but OpenSpace is a clear one that where we've brought it in. Essentially the buy there at the board level to get that investment to get into that enterprise was purely around mitigation of risk, managing risk, controlling risk. And you've got to link it back, as Angelos says, you've got to link it back to that to get the board approvals, because I'm tackling with the board here. Loads of people are going for investment around other issues in the business. This is just one, but when you're landing on productivity, mitigating risk, growing that margin, protecting the margin, that's where you've got to focus. You've got to tie it back to those things.
Yeah, 100%. And we're seeing that in our process as well. We have to put a very solid business case together, which is actually addressing the productivity and risk management. And we're quite lucky to having a category which helps to address these.
And it didn't used to be like that, Thomas, either. It didn't used to be like that, a few years ago. I think, one of the trends that we're seeing now is that if you don't have a good business case, if you can't build a good business case as a software company, the clients in construction real estate won't pay attention to you. James, I'm sure, deals with this all the time. I'm sure your LinkedIn inbox is flooded by
people,
companies pitching you.
Yeah. I mean, the other driver, the other one I've seen probably more so in the last 24 months is legislation. So the everything that's out there, the Building Safety Act, evidence, records, everything now coming to the forefront. Unfortunately, I've been in this game long enough to know that this industry changes really slow. And the thing that does change it without a shadow of a doubt, you've only got to look at health and safety legislation. The Building Safety Act is probably the biggest driver of change around managing information, managing data, evidencing, and all the bits around competence, and everything else is now driving a change in particularly around the sort of the tier one market, and it now is trickling down into that next level down. The change has got to be driven, whereas I think our industry is notoriously slow at change. But I think if you look at the investment market in new technologies, and Thomas is better placed than me to speak about this, but I think it's one of the fastest growing in terms of investment and equity coming into providers to build solutions, because it's so far behind the curve of many industries. So it's sort of accelerating, which is an exciting thing, I think, in our industry.
Yeah, no, 100%. Sure. Construction tech is very hot.
Yeah.
Regarding the trends you guys mentioned, just one thing I would add, not spending too much time on it, but what we also see in the last few years, that sustainability is something which is being considered and getting more and more important.
Yeah.
Before go to the next question, I just want to say I've seen Rob is raising the hand. I just want to ask you if you could put your question into the panel box so we don't open up for discussion, but we will read that and try to address your questions. And really the last for this introductory session is I would be very curious about the process itself. So if you identify the technology, you know what you want to choose a vendor, what is actually the process of picking the right vendor, and how you can make sure that all the stakeholders, James, you talked about stakeholders, they all aligned and contribute to this selection process?
I mean, we go through, you've gone through it, Thomas, and I'm going through it now for two other areas of the business. We go through a sort of a formal RFP process with a very clear set of requirements. I normally do it in two phases. We do long list, short lists, and then get into the product and the demonstration, as you went through, Thomas, when we said. But I think the most important thing about the stakeholder requirements, which we talked about, the other thing I think we've learned is, they're big decisions here to enter into. Generally, we're entering into a 3-year agreement, right? So when you add those numbers up over 3 years and take them to the board, they're big numbers. So don't be afraid, I'd say to the people on the call, go into maybe a pilot, test it out with a pilot, something slightly smaller than scaring the board with a big enterprise, and make sure what you're selecting out of all the requirements. We're not doing, I think we might do another session, Thomas, around, the more detail about how you pick the vendor. But the one thing that's often missing from when you're doing your selection criteria, alongside all the stuff with client references and the detail of the product and everything else, is cultural fit. Yeah. And when you look in the eyes of the people sitting opposite you, are they going to be someone who's going to work with your organization? Because I don't really like calling them vendors, and I'd like to think that the people we bring into these enterprises are true partners, and that we're going to go with them. And I'm not going to say on the journey, but we need to go with them, because their roadmap's going to change, our requirements are going to evolve, and you need people that you feel are going to work together with you and then with your other tech stack that you've got. So cultural fit would be probably one line I would say, and have a fairly high weighting when you're going through this process.
Yes.
Yeah. I would say one of the most underestimated areas, and one of the areas that we always encourage our customers to do, is when you do those pilots, speak with the end user. Don't confine the pilot to the innovation team. Don't confine the pilot to the C-suite. Go to the end user. There's a lot of products out there that look fantastic on the C-level and that fail on the user level because they're too complex, they're too difficult, they do too many things, and the end user is overwhelmed with their day-to-day work, and they don't have time to input the data. At the end of the day, you want the technology to be easy enough to use so that people consistently input data, especially now with AI. This is the most important thing you have to make sure of when you're purchasing a technology. Is it easy for my people to consistently input data using this technology? And it's one of the key factors that we look in when we evaluate, how well an adoption of a software is going at a big enterprise for our customers. Because it doesn't matter how good the technology, the solution looks. To truly be competitive, is you have to take advantage of that data. And data is about consistency and frequency. So if it's difficult for the end user, doesn't matter how good it looks on the C-suite, that data is not coming up.
Yeah, and I'll build upon that for a second. I had a refreshing moment, which are rare sometimes when you're doing this, the other week, where a person who was the end user, like Angela said, who was a project leader, a guy delivering at the sharp end, came onto a call, and I hadn't seen him for probably 5 years. We've moved companies, a small world, as we all know on the call. And he could not stop talking. He was wax lyrical about a product we had brought into that particular company at that time. It wasn't McLaren, it was another business that I mentioned earlier. He was waving his mobile phone at the webcam to absolutely saying he could not work without this particular technology in his life anymore. And he said, James, when you brought this in, this is a marvelous. We had to actually physically shut him up. And to me, that is so delightful to see, where an enterprise tool was pushed into a business, and then you moved away from that business, we've moved on, and other things have happened. And there is that individual at the sharp end delivering, saying he could not deliver that project without that. And brilliant, absolutely brilliant to see. So it is the end, you're absolutely, that is the great example of an end user being delighted.
Yeah.
And when you've got that, you're on it. You don't need to worry about the next things, about implementation challenge. You don't need to worry about anything else, because you've sold.
Yeah, that's what you want. That's what you want. That's it. You want it to be easy for the people who are inputting the data.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's sounds like a great example of adoption, James, what you mentioned.
I wish I had another 20 of those examples to tell you about.
And I just want to build on what you mentioned about encouraging pilots, or maybe James, you mentioned. I think that's actually really, really, really important, because again, that is the best way to give the tooling to the end users, and prove that the product and the solution is easy to use. And fundamentally, that's part of the scalability to make sure that there's no hurdles using. So we very much now coming to the implementation stage, and I would be actually very curious to understand that what are really the most common, the biggest challenges of technology implementation in general. So maybe Angelos, you can start addressing.
Yeah, of course. The number one challenge is when the management is not bought in, especially in Europe and the Middle East. I've studied and worked in the US, and that market that market is a little bit more bottom up, but Europe and the Middle East is much more hierarchical in its structure. So management buy-in is paramount. And one of the things we do is we ensure that the management keeps talking, keeps encouraging their people to use this technology. One, because they are reminded why they bought the technology in the first place. We remember the foundational conversations we spoke about earlier. But two, because people are just so busy and nobody likes change, and we can't shy away from that. We can't pretend like that's not a problem. It is a big problem. People, especially the construction industry, that has an average worker age of more than higher than 45 years old. It gets harder and harder to want to change, especially when you have big experience of delivering projects successfully in a lot of your career as well. But we have to change to remain competitive. So absolutely, I think management buy-in is key. And then it's the consistency of follow-ups. A lot of times companies don't think about the adoption piece when they buy the technology. It sounds great, and very often a technology partner will go in and say, "Oh yeah, we'll do everything for you. Don't worry about this. We'll set you up. It's very easy to learn." And we all know how that sounds during the sales process, and it sounds great. But when we look at a technology, we have to think about the total cost of ownership of this technology. The total cost of ownership also includes that adoption, that implementation piece. And if you don't account for that from the beginning, then you are destined to fail. And that's why digital transformation has a 70% failure rate. I kid you not. BCG did a huge study in 2019. Over 90,000 companies, 70% of all digital transformation initiatives failed to materialize. Every year, BCG found that we are wasting more than $1 trillion on wasted license fees every year. This is a companies are bleeding cash from their tech investment that they don't account for holistically, and we absolutely have to take that into account from the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely, you're right in the block hole what Angela said there. So the commitment of senior leadership and maintaining their engagement is critical. So we do that here when we've made big decisions on enterprise contracts. Every single one of those has got a set of KPIs. Every single one of those gets reported up to board level. Adoption, feedback. We even do league tables within our region. So a regional based business, league tables are a cracking way to drive further engagement, because the MDs of each region they want the top slots. Yeah. I was just about to say they want to be the Man City, but I don't know what the league table looks like, so I'll leave that alone. And if you don't drive the continual adoption after you've got that senior level engagement, it can drift away, like you said, about 70% very, very quickly. The other thing I'd say about that you need to continue to keep the enterprise and not be part of the 70% is that I call it central resource or ownership of these enterprise contracts, and they need to be managed, right? And if you're a regional business, and any large tier one or enterprise is generally regionally based or sector based or something like that, you need someone to own that. You need someone to manage that relationship, that partnership, to maintain the momentum, to keep the KPIs, to do the regular. You'll know this, Tamas, better than anyone, monthly vendor meetings, looking at how the adoption's going, what are the issues. And we've driven that really, really hard with every enterprise that we've done to ensure that the momentum that you think you've got with the euphoria of signing contracts and that doesn't drift away. So the sustainment is maintained through KPIs, adoptions, reporting, senior level engagement. And if you look at some of these numbers, and we're talking about sustainment of enterprise contracts here. And I'll name a couple of products, we brought in to change in a large enterprise. You've always got something going on when you buy an enterprise. Possibly you're doing it, you've got to displace somebody, or the old way is happening. So I call it new co, old co. And it takes a long time. And I guess it's generally, I've seen in most organizations I've done this, it normally could be 2 to 3 years to move from old co to new co, because if a company like McLaren is delivering 45, 50 jobs at any one point, you can't just switch a button on in the morning and then all new projects are using OpenSpace, or Deluxe, or whatever product that you're bringing in. It takes time, because there's always a tail, and there's a decision point of where you draw that line and you bring in the new enterprise that you've done. But that old co, new co normally takes. But give you a couple of figures. We brought in Deluxe to do our field management activities, and we've got them now on 95% of jobs, 66 projects live. So that contract, like I'm saying, is probably entering 2.5 years. So it's taken 95%. And OpenSpace, we signed that, I think, in August 2024, Thomas, I think, if I'm right. So probably 8 months old, your contract with us. That scaled to 34 live jobs across our business within 8 months. And that's pretty fast, right? New co, old co, that's pretty fast. So, but you need that central resource to scale it. You need the ownership, you need the senior management, continued buy-in, but you need someone to be managing that. And when you're a fragmented business, or you're a regional business, it's very difficult for conflicting messages to go back to someone like an OpenSpace or a vendor, because they're hearing it from different regions. So you need someone collating that, drive a common message, so the partnership with your vendor, with your partner, with someone like OpenSpace, can continue to grow. So they know you know them, and then you can get this enterprise, get the momentum up, and you're not part of the 70% number that Angelos quoted earlier. So that's what I would say. So I think critical to always maintain a sort of know where the relationship sits, and you said life, the cost of the overall cost, Angelos, what you said, you've got to factor in people on the call. You've got to bring in resources. We've got we brought people in, Thomas, who their full-time job is to manage this rollout, and that's to me good value. That's got to be happening.
Absolutely.
It's interesting, both of you talking about people here. We're always coming back to people. It's valid on the buying, on a management level, that's critical, but also on a user level, or driving this adoption or engagement throughout the contract life. And I guess the next question is really about how you can ensure that this technology is then scalable. And James, you mentioned a few things already about how you can get to that 90% or 100% coverage, but what are your thoughts on the key factors of scalability here?
One that I've not really touched on before in this conversation, alongside the KPIs, the ownership, central resources, governance. Sad word. Everyone probably now, we've got the numbers, everyone's switching off, but governance is so important. If you're going to set a benchmark of the rules that you're going to use that technology by, you've got to measure, and you've got to do some governance. You've got to do a clear process that you're maintaining and you're governing. I'll give you an example again of an organization, not this one I've worked for before. We did a load of work. It was around producing site diaries, and we created a rule that we wanted one per person per day, using this technology to do it. And then the comms went out, all the stuff went out, everyone's on board. We moved it up to a staggering 70, 80, 90% of people were complying by that, and the enterprise, it was being used, everyone was doing it. As soon as the governance, the reporting stopped, it returned to the norm within 8 weeks. So all that effort to get it in place, you take your foot off the pedal, you don't govern it, people generally return to the least sort of form of resistance, generally, yeah? So that would be my biggest message to the people on the call. You've got to put some governance in, and you've got to be unrelenting in keeping to that. You can't say you're doing it and then not do it, because you only got to badly implement one bit of enterprise technology in a company, and it doesn't matter what you do with the next one, you're tainted by, and that's why I'm obsessed with when OpenSpace came in. We've done some good successful rollouts of other enterprises. It had to go right, because the people on the jobs, the sharp end, only remember a poor implementation, don't they? That's the only ever, you know, we're all the same, don't we? We only moan about what's gone wrong, and anyone remembers poor implementation. So, you know, again, another example, I generally deliver project-based technology tools. I don't do group rollout of sort of central systems like expenses systems or something like that. But I, you know, worked in an organization where they were rolling out an expense policy, a new technology to do with expenses and submitting it. It didn't go particularly well. And then everything we were doing around rolling the project technology got tainted by a bad rollout of another technology. And you can't avoid that, because the people on sites are just being bombarded by change. And so whether you're doing it right or wrong, you've got to get everything working right. Otherwise, you get tainted very quickly by a bad implementation. I'll shut up.
Yeah.
I know we're short of time.
Well, I
so.
mean, it's no. It's just interesting. It sounds quite extreme to me that, you know, after stopping tracking after, you know, 8 weeks, suddenly usage drops so badly. I mean, for me, it's fundamentally a question is how much actually, you know, the end users see the value, or, you know, how much they actually really, you know, see the value.
But the end value sometimes has to be. We got in one organization, we got if I'm right here, psychologists in to help us write the what's in it for me, so that when we were implementing the technology, you were in the brains of the people to say, you've got to explain to people what's in it for them, because sometimes it's not overtly, it is for yours. I think it's easy.
Yeah, I wanted to say it's easy for me, and now I recognize that, you know, in our case it's easy, but yeah, I get it.
But some people, I go back to the site diary example, right? The user saying, well, what's in it for me? So you've got to explain, actually, it's not, it's for the company, because it's about protection. It's about understanding. It could be for claims, pursuing a claim, defending a claim. So for the user, sometimes you've got to explain the why very clearly, because it may not be that clear to them. Yeah. Sorry.
No, I totally with you, James. I think that's very important. When it comes to scalability, I think that it's very important for a technology to solve an obvious problem. If the technology solves an obvious problem, then it becomes a lot easier to scale, and we can keep, you know, banging the drum and keep reminding people of that problem that technology is solving. But it needs to solve that obvious problem from the beginning. And then on a company level, we need to be continuously investing on building a culture of innovation. Don't let it slide and say, all right, yeah, we bought OpenSpace and you know, we adopted it on 90 projects, and great, you know, we're innovative. No, we need to be continuously investing, continuously speaking about the results, reminding people of how it used to be before and how it is now, so that we don't just stay on the technology that we bought today, but we also think about the technologies that need to come in the future. And Thomas, to your point earlier on, you know, the end user and the obvious problem, I think James, you know, has an important point there. It's that, you know, there's a technology can give different value to different people on the corporate ladder. It gives different value to the C-level than the value it gives to the end user level. And we need to be aware and communicating that, at all times. If you recall, Thomas, in the early days, in the OpenSpace early days, I think one of the things that OpenSpace did very well is that it was very well aware of their buyer, their big enterprise buyer. And from very early on, OpenSpace was secure, SOC 2 compliant, invested in data centers in different regions. These are, we look at these now and we forget that, OpenSpace was, 1, 2, 3 years old when it started investing in these areas. And this gives, does the end user really care about that? Not really. But the C-level cares about that. And that's why it's very important when we look at products, are these products scalable? If we're the end user, we need to be asking what's important for our management. We want to be promoting a technology. And if we are the management, we need to be asking what's important for the end user. So we have this harmony and we're able to scale the technology.
Yeah.
No, it's a very good point. You addressed some really good topics there about scalability. James, is there anything you want to add about, scaling up a solution?
No, I'll just say, don't be the most important thing is, and it's really difficult, but you've got to identify, measure the benefits, and keep communicating it upwards and downwards, and quite quickly the new norm gets reset, doesn't it? So your point, Angelos, people suddenly forget about where we were, and then you've brought something. So you've got to be a bit on it in terms of keep communicating. We do a lot around case study. We do stuff internally. We do a lot of project user feedback. Drop-in sessions have gone really well, either just to allow jobs to people can just register for one of our enterprises. Go on the internet. We'll do a drop-in. One of the guys in the team, Tom, runs a little drop-in session. People from projects who are having issues or want a bit of feedback drop into that session, pretty informal, give a bit of feedback and keep the momentum flowing. Important to keep doing it, but it's so easy, Thomas. I think it's so easy once you, and particularly people, I guess, like myself, who are trying to bring in that you've done one and you've moved on. You never move on. You've got to keep your hands on. You've signed some big contracts. You've spent a lot of money. You've got to keep your hands on it to ensure that momentum is maintained continuously, and not just maintained, but is advancing all the time.
Yeah, and it doesn't even have to be, a lot of times we say, building a culture of innovation, and people, oh my gosh, I have to do lunch and learns, and I have to do this, and I have to do that, and I have to, bring speakers. A lot of, most of the times, all you have to do is set up a Teams or a Slack channel in your company and get people talking about just get them to share their experiences. Ignite the conversation, and then technology and innovation becomes the standard way that you operate, and not just something that is a tick in a box or nice to have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's really covering the point I wanted actually to ask, guys, that, how you make sure that you can capture the, the learnings, share this information, and share the knowledge within the business. I mean, do you have some good examples?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen all sorts of things done, and Angelos sort of touched, people creating these sort of innovation portals and various other things that
never work.
No, I'm not. I gotta be with you, mate. I'm not entirely sure. I've seen a lot of time. I mean, what we did here a couple of months ago, we took people who had delivered large scale change in the. We just sat in a room, and I tasked everyone to talk about 2 journeys they'd been on, because we've generally got people delivering different enterprise change here. And they talked about the challenges and what went well, what didn't go well. And then they weren't allowed to produce any slides. They just talked the story of what they felt and a reflection. Someone had to listen to that. So I got someone to listen to it. And they wrote down what they thought that person was saying, which is always quite interesting, that what we say and what people are hearing sometimes is 2 different things. And then we all did it. And we were all, I'm more project biased. Other people are rolling out sort of central enterprise systems, to do with expenses and commercial and financial. And it was really interesting because when we nutted down the learnings, even though there were different products, we basically produced a document at the end called The Key Attributes of Delivering Successful Change in McLaren. So and why did we do that? Because you could go on the internet now, well, more than the internet, you can go onto any of the chat GPT type things. You can write delivering successful change, give me the thing, come up with that. We didn't want to do that. We wanted to, in this organization that we're sitting in today, what has been the good and the bad experiences delivering change? Because they will be subtly different than delivering them in Langeroy or delivering them through Calpine, multiplex, wherever you are or wherever you are. So when you reflect and sit down in your organization and you are honest about what's gone well, write it down. And then what we did, we just put it in a short 10 bullets. And then anyone who starts up change in this organization just needs to read this. And it just says, just look out for X, look out for Y. This works well, this tends to not work well. And that's the best way. And that's the way that we're doing it here. I'll let you know let's do it in 12 months' time, whether that's worked or not. But for me, it was a really different way of doing it to what I've experienced before, because it was interesting hearing other people's perspectives and having a conversation rather than submitting it into a portal of great ideas was a far more effective way. Well, I think it was of communicating, but I'll let you know whether it works or not, Thomas, later on.
But it definitely sounds very great. You bring this home to the users, and you really engage with them. I know, Angelos, you do a lot of work around this area.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I mean, the simplest way I can communicate this is that people love to hear what other people are doing. It's a human trait. We are social creatures. We love to hear what our neighbors doing, what our coworkers doing, what the company next to us is doing. We recently went to a fantastic session of that was presented by the director of strategy at Aston Martin Racing, the Formula One team. And what she said was that one of the most interesting, she's responsible for the pit schedule of Aston Martin's Formula One team. And one of the things she said is that she loved working in Formula One because she could see what all of her competitors were doing. They're all on the same line, so she could peek and look at what the competitors were doing, and she could get better with her strategy. And I think when it comes to innovation, when it comes to capturing the learnings, people love to talk. Get your people talking, and that's what we do. That's what we encourage with our customers. We get people talking. We get them to share their experiences. We're doing a rollout. We bring the person from the previous project to talk to the next project. They love to do that. They love to share their findings, and it's truly very successful, and it's great. You hear the good, you hear the bad. That person also gets some ideas. They hear a new perspective that they haven't thought about before. Everyone feels much more encouraged, and again, it goes back to the culture and back to James's point as well, which is to account for this culture when you're making that original purchase decision, because your technology partner as well it needs to be encouraging this from the very beginning. Not everyone has the James.
But I think most that our partners we've brought in genuinely want to hear what their customers are feeling. And sometimes what's happening when you've talked through what Angelos is saying before and you actually work through, sometimes actually what is perceived to be something that it actually isn't. It's miscommunication or something else. Other things, we've had another good vendor here called Index, who have really, gate entry system, workforce management, they've really listened and demonstrate through a sort of piloting scheme that they can work with us and maybe look at their roadmap of development and move quicker because of what their customers are saying. So, you know, it's talking, like Angela said, I think you've got to talk within your own company. You've got to talk upwards, what we said right there, but you've also got to talk absolutely with the end user. Yeah. Get your feedback, and then get a relationship with your enterprise partner that you feel you can have an open dialogue all the time with them. And they're not just a provider of a service, they're actually a true partner. I think, you know, we're always asking Tamas and all, what's on your roadmap? You know, we want this on your roadmap.
I just want to build on this, guys, because it's so important. We actually sometimes call these agreements partnership agreements, you know, and we regularly checking in. You know, we not only have those business reviews, but we're checking in with projects and end users, and regularly, you know, tracking what they do, what they need, you know, how they can, you know, use our solution. So that feedback is actually, James, what you mentioned is super important. I mean, the discussion is amazing. I'm conscious of the time. We're running out of the time, but there's one topic I really don't want to miss, and maybe it's a nice wrap up. And actually, we have a few questions as well around KPIs. So, you know, maybe as a last question, what I would be interested in is, you know, what matrices or KPIs should you track as an organization to measure, you know, the efficiency of adoption?
Yeah, I mean, go on, Angela.
Over, James.
Yeah.
Okay. So, you know, very simply, the key metric is it increasing my profitability, or is it increasing my productivity? You know, that is the top key metric that you need to look at. Sector has an adoption intelligence index that we provide to our customers. It's a formula I'm happy to share with anyone who asks for it, you know, after the call, which is a combination of the speed with which your users are adopting a particular technology, multiplied by the engagement rate of the modules that you want to be utilizing, and multiplied by the performance improvement that you see in your business. So it's kind of like a health score that you can look at as a key metric. But it all comes down to, is this helping me be more profitable? Is this helping me grow? Is it helping me manage more projects with the same amount of resources? These are the key metrics that are important when we're rolling out a technology on the enterprise level. This is what management backs and drives behind it, you know, and helps to keep everyone else engaged as well.
Yeah. And I'd say, just interesting what you said there. We tend to start with 2 or 3 that we're definitely with OpenSpace, and we've done it with our Daylex agreement. Is we've started with just purely looking at adoption, right? So everything else, because if everything else needs to, and then not be afraid then to grow the KPIs around other aspects after you focus on the adoption. So we focus on, you know, setting some rules about what we think would be, a bit like you're saying, what we would expect to be. And sometimes people are going, but that's unfair, because we had a good discussion the other day. Someone was arguing with my benchmark. So I had them as a red, so their adoption was lower than what I would expect. They said, but in this sector, I won't name the sector, but in this sector, you wouldn't expect that. You're comparing it to a residential scheme, which is, but in a funny sort of way, it was brilliant, because they really cared that the metrics that were being reported up the line was showing them in a way they didn't want to be shown. So in a funny sort of way, I didn't overly get worked up about what the mechanics of the metric were, because they were engaging in, I really want to get better, because we want our projects to be at the top of the league table, and then evolve the KPI. So when we got more data, we've been on the journey on one of those enterprises now for a lot longer. We're now starting to refine what those would be. Could we have written those a year and a half ago? I don't think we could have done. Yeah, so we started there and then just grow it over time. When you get more data, the whole thing is data. When you get more data, refine it, they become better. But I don't think you need to over-analyze and get over, set something, because if you don't set something, some line, you don't know where you are. You've got no relative point. So set something, but don't be afraid. If you get it wrong, it doesn't really matter. It engages people to start a conversation, which goes back to the bit we keep going on about, which is what you need. You need some dialogue and you need some conversation going. And in fact, the one thing I would do is, if people are talking and getting excited and animated, I think you're probably okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just to build on that, Angelos, you mentioned that profitability. I guess that's your ultimate goal, that's the objective. But I guess you want to track.
Tech can bring profit, and it should.
Yeah, 100%.
It's that simple.
When talking about the KPIs, I guess I'm a bit more down to earth there as well. There are ways also to track, the adoption and the usage, and there are some important metrics around that. But again, those data again available, and that gives you a really, really nice.
Another metric I use, Tamas, is if the MDs for the regions aren't shouting at me, right, and there's no noise, you're probably it's probably getting them to the new normal, which is it's working. Going back to the start about it's doing an activity more efficiently than it was before, and you're probably okay. Yeah, because when you've got the top level management hearing noise, which invariably I don't think anyone on the call who's worked in large organizations know, it pretty quickly goes from the bottom, from the ground up, goes very quickly, escalates to the top when something isn't working. Yeah.
A lot faster.
Yeah,
than
incredibly fast. Yeah.
No, guys, honestly, very good discussion. We have quite a few questions. I probably want to pick two, and then we will run out of time. But I read this, and then please just answer briefly if that's all right. And one question, actually, that was the last question currently. How can we convince people to move towards new technology who are stuck in their old way, striving for a better, efficient digital path? I know it's a huge topic, but any quick tips here?
Well, look,
we're facing this all the time. That's the challenge.
You need to clearly define so I'm gonna go with the assumption that that Gavin, who's asking here, and thank you for your question, is thinking about it from let's say from a digital transformation perspective. Gavin, I don't know what you do, but I'm based on your question, I'm just going to assume that you're in digital engineering, and you want to convince people to move from their old ways. And I'll say that my father is an engineer of 40 years, so I have firsthand experience with, let's say, convincing people to move from their old ways. I think you need to clearly define the problem that you're solving, and you need to clearly indicate the return of investment that they should be expecting. I'm going to solve this problem, and it's going to save you this much money. And all of a sudden, that 100,000, 200,000, 300,000, whatever 100,000 or whatever million pound conversation you're having with management, it becomes a lot clearer. If some people might say, all right, this technology is expensive because it costs £3 million a year. Yeah, but if it's saving me £30 million a year or more, then it's well worth it. Who wouldn't pay 3 million to make 30? So it's these two things. You have to clearly define the problem. And you need to communicate the return on investment. I think people do the first thing a lot better, and the second thing a lot worse. They don't invest the time required to either research the return on investment or communicate it to the people that they're trying to convince.
Yeah. I would say, I know it's a good question, and one I use in presentations as I'm not entirely sure it's politically correct that I can use it anymore, but it's an adoption. So if you go on Google and look at the adoption curve, you see the bell curve, and then you see the sort of laggards at one end, and then the early adopters, and it's called crossing the chasm. And as soon as you cross the chasm and you've got the early majority, and you then get people into the place, it feels very uncomfortable that I've not moved because people around me are moving and I'm still standing in my old place. And if Thomas, I probably won't be allowed to, but if you wanted maybe to Google, there's a really good example of a man. It's called the man dancing on the hill, and it's a chap who dancing at a festival somewhere on a hill, dancing like an idiot, and everyone's looking at him. And then two of his mates come up and they start dancing with him. And then the camera pans back, and what it shows is people joining him, not doing it quite right, not dancing exactly as he right, but dancing it. And then the point of it, you let it play for a minute, the entire hill moves down to join. And that analogy is always in my head whenever I'm doing change in any organization. You've got to get the one or two people. I always leave the meetings going, are you dancing or you're not? Are you sitting down watching or are you up dancing? And once you get those people dancing, the critical mass, and get it going, get the momentum that we talked about throughout this going, it feels uncomfortable then for some people to stand and watch. And then you've got it. Once you've done that, you've got it, would be my. So dancing, get people dancing would be
That's
my.
great, James. And Phil actually have seen your video or know the video. Great video, leaders.
Oh, is he? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's good. And this is the last question, actually. I just want to pick Phil's question because he put a few questions into the box. And maybe we can wrap it up with that. Builds very much on the previous one. Do you feel vendors should position the values for each team specifically, or focus on the value perceived by the decision maker alone?
So I think it really depends on who the vendor is, how deeply the vendor is involved, right? So because a lot of times organizations they'll say, all right, I'll take it from here, I'll manage the rollout, I'll manage the pilot, and then the vendor, the technology company is not that involved, with the end users. I would say it's certainly very important to communicate the value that the decision makers see, but like we said earlier, the end users are critical in this process. So if they feel that there's nothing in it for them, and this is what we hear most of the time, this is a report for management. It's not, why aren't you doing this? It's a report for management. It's not for me. Did you know that this could save you 2-3 hours, or it's saving you already 2-3 hours a week? Did you realize that? Oh, I never really thought about that. So it is important. I think communicating I'm not going to throw this on the technology companies. I think this is more of an internal problem for internal teams to solve, how they communicate the value to the end user. At the end of the day, it's the people who are putting their signature on the contract who are liable for this. So I think they are more motivated and they will do a much better job in communicating the value that the end user will see.
Yeah, I think you've got to do both. In my opinion, you've got to do the end user and then the person who signed the contract. It's both ends.
I want to really pick up the ball, Angelos. I think we need to do both. At least we really make an effort to really explaining what's in it for you, what's the value for the different stakeholders.
Yeah. Or at the very least, educate management that they need to be doing that as well, for sure. Yeah.
Guys, we run out of time. The discussion was amazing. I loved it. Really, really thank you very much for your active participation, insight. For the audience, thank you very much for staying with us. Yeah. You stayed with us till the end. Everyone will get the recording at some point. I'm not sure when, but thank you very much.
Hope to thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Thomas, for inviting us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, James.